Hello, and welcome to the Dissonance Podcast, where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. This week, Elizabeth is joined by Nafees Alam to discuss men. In this episode, we honor the importance of men and masculine traits for a functioning society and human survival, for productive and enjoyable interactions, and for the sake of diversity. We talk about men in the gym, men in the classroom, men in ideology, men's portrayal in the media, masculinity, and relationships. As a jumping off point, we use an article about the importance of both belonging and uniqueness. The author, Peter Luca Verstegen, argues that young men may feel excluded and undervalued in the current socio-political environment. When society's attention is focused on the distinctiveness of some, the special and important contributions of other individuals and groups may naturally be set aside. Elizabeth and Nafees admit to seeing the basic human needs of belonging and uniqueness reflected in their own behavioral choices and preferences, and wonder if this is an unavoidable social cycle. Nafees helps us close on a positive note because, above all, he believes in a resilient society. Hello, welcome back to the Dissonance Podcast, and welcome back to Nafees, friend of the pod, Nafees. Today, we're loosely going to talk about an article. We're going to talk about a bunch of research and ideas. But I had read an article about, it's in political psychology, and we'll post it. It's about voting behavior, which I was less interested in, but I really was interested in this idea, the optimal distinctiveness research, about how even majority members can feel excluded from society, and this sort of push-pull where you belong to you feel very connected to the larger sort of society, maybe your nation or maybe your state or your college or whatever your group is, larger society group is, but you feel like there's nothing unique about you. Within your group, you don't have much. There's nothing special about you, and that sort of impacts the way that you behave and interact with other people. So that's the piece. This sort of idea of it's sort of the author says, people feel disrespected, maybe threatened, and it renders the original inclusion, the inclusiveness need unsatisfied. So even though you are clearly part of a larger group, that you're feeling sort of, I don't know, left out a little bit. Again, lack of uniqueness. And so I know that you've done some research on sort of, male identity, dating, that kind of thing. And so, I sent it to you, and so that's where we are in this conversation. So
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I love being here. And this is a conversation that is really important to me because of all the work and all the publications that I've had recently related to men's mental health. And you're absolutely right. There is this element of thinking of yourself as a spokesperson for your group as opposed to a spokesperson for yourself. And so there's a tendency for many of us, not just men and not just women, but many of us, not all of us certainly, to think that what is the question that was asked, and how would a person that aligns with the group that I align with, how would they answer that question? And that's how I'll answer it too. Now, this can quickly go into a political conversation, but that's not the purpose here.
right.
But you can certainly see how, like, if I don't have an opinion about something, then if I'm asked a question, I might ask myself, well, what does my side of politics say about it? Well, that's going to be my side because I want my side to win. What ends up happening in doing that is that if you continue to do that, you start to lose yourself in order to find something that isn't you. In this case, in this particular example, a political ideology or a political party. In other examples, like men in men's arenas, or women in women's arenas, um, many times, I just don't have an opinion about something, but I'm not allowed to say that. Nafees, well, you're an educated man. What do you think
Yeah.
about this? It's so difficult for me to say. I know I should care, but I just don't. you know, instead we're stuck like having to prove ourselves and saying, oh, okay, let me give it some thought, just a couple of seconds here. Okay, so this is what my side would say, even though I don't particularly care about this. So I'm just gonna parrot what my side says and make it seem as though I'm speaking for myself, when in reality, I just don't care. I wish we could live in a day where we can easily say, I just don't care about this. Like, what? I don't have an opinion about this. It's
Or
not
I
even.
sometimes I feel like I should care, but I don't have time in my life investigate this.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of this article, they really mentioned uh, how in this age of DEI and stuff, whites might use their um, what do I call it? Like, use DEI kinds of programs and redoubling their efforts towards minority inclusion and stuff as a way to be distinctive, right? Look, I'm a white person and I'm advocating for this. Look how unique I am. Look how special I am.
Yeah.
And in this article, they're more talking about men and feeling like um they're they may vote for a hard right
Mhm.
kind of candidate
Yep.
because it gives them something to talk about that feels unique, that feels it may not be that they even originally agreed with it or cared, like you said, maybe it's like I really don't care about this, but what I do care about is having something to say that's
Yeah.
special, that might that grabs attention, that when I'm at a I'm at my frat party, or I'm hanging out with, I'm at my work lunch or whatever, that I can say something that shocks people, that makes me, unusual or whatever. And so I feel this. You and I both hang out in gyms,
Yep.
and I do feel this at the gym. And it's kind of funny because you had sent me you and Jen actually had sent me a little blurb about, it's like, the bro space or
Yeah.
whatever at the gym. And it's related to this because I texted back, I don't like women in the weight room. And and that is part of this idea, right? This
Yeah.
uniqueness, right? Like, because I'm one of the guys in the weight room and I don't want other women in the weight room. And that sounds, it's like, oh, we can laugh about it, and I'm aware of it, so I can laugh about it. But if it caused me to alienate other people at the gym, that would become a problem,
Yeah.
right? That's now I don't have, I'm having trouble integrating into a group that I care about.
Mhm.
And what's my next step? I'm not sure, but maybe I go online, or I find other ways to stand out, because now the weight room has lots of women in it.
Yeah.
Um, and and I'm not so unique anymore.
I when we talk about that political perspective, it is 100% true. Lots of studies are being done about how young men are shifting right, young women are shifting left. So there's greater and greater political division. Now, dating is certainly something that comes up, but beyond that, I've given this some thought. And some of the questions that come up for me, and I'm not trying to be antagonistic by any means, is that, like, what does the left bring to men? Maybe it's not so much that men are leaving the left, but perhaps the left has left men.
Mhm.
We have the man versus bear argument, where it's like, one of the articles that I'm currently working on is titled "The Left would prefer bears over men." you
I
know
Yes, I read that article. I read this like little blurb where a woman wrote this big. It's probably what you're referring to. She
yeah.
wrote an op-ed where she said if she were in the woods, she would rather meet a bear than a man. And I'm
Exactly.
like, are you nuts? But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But that's where we are, and that this is it's sort of like anytime a woman hits a man, it's hilarious. Anytime a man hits a woman, it's domestic violence.
Hmm.
Anytime there's a woman-only space, it's strong, powerful. Anytime there's a men's only space, it is misogynistic and sexist, and we need to find out what's going on there. And so the question is like, what does the left really bring to men? You can't expect people to stick around while you're bashing them over and over and over again. So I'm starting to come to the conclusion that perhaps it's not men leaving the left, rather the left leaving men. And that creates an environment where, in the gym, for example, and the gym is, everything is political these days, and it's just a matter of figuring out how. And the gym is an environment, often tends to be an environment where you put in the work and you get back the results from the work that you've put in. There is no, if you've done the work, it'll show up on your body.
Well, until you're past 60.
Well, that's different. I'm talking about like, but that even that, if you're comparing yourself to other 60-year-olds, other 70s, then that stays
Yeah,
consistent.
then I'm probably
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right.
It's one of those things where it's like, if you are unsuccessful in the gym, the only reason why, or not the only, usually the only reason why is because of you. And that's personal responsibility. There's a side of politics that prioritizes personal responsibility over government, services and things like that. So you can see how even subconsciously men are drawn to that, particularly in the gym. I don't talk about politics in the gym. I try not to talk about politics ever, just because of the roles that I have and writing and stuff like that. But when the topic comes up, it's usually like men in the gym tend to veer heavy right, probably 80 to 85%, which is alarming because that does not indicate people outside of the gym. And I've been curious about this, and usually the guys that are like very fit and very strong and very, you could tell that they've gone to the gym. Part of their rationale for being not left, sometimes they're not right either.
Right.
Just let's not assume that just because you're not, Democrat, you must be a Republican. Part of the reason why is because they say, well, I take responsibility for my own body. And the left doesn't teach me how to take responsibility, or teaches me more to complain about what I don't have rather than use what I do have. So it sort of dominoes into other conversations, which kind of makes sense as far as why young men are more and more shifting to the right.
Um, yeah, I was like, I also notice in the gym there's a protectiveness, sort of that's so, and I do this too. So if I see somebody benching, I keep my eye on them, right? That's part of what we do in the gym. There's a community of safety, right? And it doesn't matter whether you're left or right or, or whatever. I'm watching in the mirror or I'm watching down, I'm watching them directly. They don't necessarily know that I'm watching them, right? And
Right.
I think that there's this feeling, a little bit of safety of most of us, because we know that other people are kind of watching out, to make sure that if we need help, somebody's going to be there. And I don't feel that in most other places in my life either. So that's an aspect of sort of gym etiquette, if you will. That's also, I think that when somebody new comes in, especially women who tend not to be that, interestingly aren't that way in the gym at all, I can't, I can't help. So they tend to have their blinders on, they're not looking around as much. But people who don't conform to some extent to gym etiquette are shunned, basically. You're expected to, to put your weights away, or, well, we didn't used to, but now we do. Now it's gym etiquette.
Yeah.
But to not stand in particular places and just stand there and do 14 sets, so that nobody else can use something or whatever, or to put articles of clothing in 4 different places because you're using all 4 of those spots. And these are things that women do. This is why I don't like women in the weight room, right? Because these are things that women do. And so I don't want to mischaracterize, because men are also very caring in the gym. And I certainly, people have come to my defense, more so in the gym than other places in my life. I feel safe there. And I think that's also part of the male, sort of the bro, place in the gym. They feel empowered, I
Yeah.
think, to do that kind of thing. They feel strong there also, right?
Yeah. I love seeing anyone at the gym, man, woman, child, if they're accompanied by an adult.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, yeah, get them started early so this,
Yeah, yeah.
a lifetime of fitness. But I love seeing anyone and everyone at the gym. Also, regardless of body type, too. Like,
Mhm.
it takes a lot of courage to go into that space. I love seeing anyone at the gym. However,
They're very accepting. I mean,
yeah,
I think people have this idea that the gym is not an accepting place, but they're just like you said, if you're willing to work hard and
yeah,
you're willing to sort of get with the gym etiquette,
yeah,
right? Then they don't care what you look like.
yeah.
If you're working hard, they're right there with you.
Well, the
Yeah.
gym culture is such that, if you look like you haven't been to the gym, we all realize how courageous you are being to enter that space. And if we're watching you, it's to keep you safe. And it's really like it's an inspiration. My goodness, I can't tell you how inspiring I find it when someone who, and I don't want to be insensitive by saying, what does it look like to not go to the gym? Do the math, okay?
Yeah.
Let's say it explicitly. But for our listeners, whatever you're thinking of, that's what it is. But to see someone who looks like they don't go to the gym be in there and we're using those machines, I am so inspired because you and I, and this is an audio one, but if people were to look at us, you and I look like we live in the gym. There's nothing inspirational about Elizabeth and Nafees being in the gym when they look like they live there. When someone doesn't look like they work out there all the time and they're there, it is so inspirational to me to see that. So I'm in favor of as many people going to the gym as possible. However, this is where I sort of draw the line in that would I spot a woman doing a bench press, for example? Now, for those of our listeners who don't know, which I'm sure most do, but let's just quickly explain it anyway. The way you single spot a bench press is that your crotch hovers over the head of the person lifting. Now, the optics of that can be very, taken out of context and made sexual.
And
Uh,
I never thought of that before. Never.
yeah.
But just in the last few years, I certainly have thought of it, but I never used to think of it at all.
So I've gotten into the mindset of like, I will encourage a woman to bench press. I might even ask somebody else, so this way we can double spot on both
Hmm.
sides, even if it's like something that I can curl with one hand. Um, but I think explanation is important. So I've had women come up to me in the gym and say, "Hey, like you're a big guy, can you spot me on this?" And I'll say, "I'd love to, but the optics of me standing over you like that is just not going to be cool. Can I get someone else to double spot, even though like it's not a lot of weight for us?" And usually people are understanding of it because TikTok culture has gotten to the point where like so many people have tried to cancel other people, that I found that many women are understanding of when I choose not to single spot, a woman on the bench. What's even more sexual is single spotting on the squat. You're literally
Well,
essentially,
I was going to say the same thing because you have to get up underneath. You have to put your sort of legs underneath their legs. You have to get sort of underneath their arms,
yeah,
and so yeah, you're sort of underneath their armpits basically,
yeah,
to do a good spot. I mean, you can do a crappy spot that would
yeah,
potentially hurt them,
exactly.
but
And
that's how, yeah.
you don't want anyone. I mean, spotting. The whole idea around spotting is to not get someone hurt.
Yeah, a bad spot is worse than no spot.
Oh, 100%,
Yeah, yeah,
100%. Because with a bad spot, I mean, no spot at all, you can just release the weight. You'll get
yes.
injured, but you're not going to get, it's not going to be a months long injury. But I wouldn't spot a woman on the squat for sure. And I,
And I notice men and women in the gym don't interact as much as they used to. Again, we used to be much more, friendly and talkative. And I don't see that. I don't see the joking around with the women anymore. And, and it makes me sad. It makes me sad because how I've met some of my best guy friends in the gym.
Yeah.
and people that with whom I had long-term friendships.
Mhm.
I babysat their kids and, like went to bars with them and, all that kind of stuff. And so it makes me sad
Well, a
that
few
people are missing out on that.
well, a few bad apples have tried so hard to get some guys canceled at the gym that now, like, the response from, again, it goes back to how we started this conversation. You cannot expect guys to stick around when you've already left them. It goes back to a political conversation, like, guys aren't leaving, the left is leaving men.
Mhm.
And so what this then creates, the concept of this, our conversation today is about, the consequences of alienating men. What ends up happening is exactly what you've mentioned, is that men have felt so alienated that they refuse to approach a woman to even joke around with them at the gym. Oh, well, how might this look? I might get canceled. I might get kicked out of the gym. Even if you have a girlfriend like I do, and Ruby and I go to the gym together sometimes, even then I'm like, no, like, even if the girls in the gym know that I have a girlfriend, and that maybe they feel more comfortable with me knowing that I already have a girlfriend who I come to the gym with, I'm still not about it, because you never know how things can be taken out of context. So men are stuck, in this concept of society alienating men. Men are now stuck playing defense. Now, I want to spend some time here because I don't want this to be a left men situation, left side of politics, men's side of situation thing. The right is just as responsible for the alienation of men. And I'll explain how. The right is very pro marriage. The right is very pro family. The right is also just as likely to ask for a divorce. Women tend to ask for 70% of divorces, 80% of their college educated. And so the right being so pro marriage, the question becomes, what is the benefit to men in getting married? Now, the benefit to women is that men are supposed to protect and provide and, do all of the things. That is a traditional assumption. The right side of politics tends to be very traditional, and yet we fail to be able to answer the question of, what do men get out of marriage? What do men get out of society as it is today? So it's not a left versus men situation. It's a left and right, banding together essentially against men, where men are essentially playing defense both against the left and the right.
Yeah, and I mean, I I think that we see this. I've complained about this for years. It used to be I got kind of sick of like movies and television shows where it's like man chases woman, man saves woman,
Mhm.
right? It's like, can you think of anything different here? But now it's the man is the hapless loser, just kind of he's the butt of the jokes. He's, I mean, I don't even know if he's necessarily shown as a provider even so much anymore. He's just kind of, I don't know, he's comic relief, and so even and in the movies we can't, it's like you gotta turn the the heroes have to be these unique, it's unique gender, it's unique race, it's unique size, it's unique, I mean there has to be something sort of minority-ish
Mm.
about the hero or heroine now. um and I mean, like, I mean, Black Panther was perfect, right? I mean, that's Black Panther is a black character.
Mhm.
So that's, but so often we just see this like jamming in of diversity
Yeah.
in places where it doesn't feel right, and at not only that, but at the expense of men. And again, like what's in it for them to watch these movies, to take a girl to a movie
Yeah.
where they're going to be just the dumb sidekick that
Yeah.
the girl is leading around. I don't know.
Yeah. So men have wisened up and understood that there really isn't much incentive to participating in society anymore. And so we're going into video games, we're doing the jobs that we like to do, and we're not getting married, we're not getting, having as many girlfriends. And when I say we, I have a girlfriend, obviously. What I'm saying, I'm just saying men in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
Statistically, the aggregate man, we are not engaging with society anymore. And ultimately, it's you can't shame us into it. I see, just the other day I was looking at a Pierce Morgan panel, and people in the panel were trying to shame men into coming back and dating and
Yeah.
like being and providing and
Like that's going to
protecting.
work. Shame you into, yeah.
And,
No.
and and one of the guys, I think his name was Andrew something, and he was talking about how, like, well, what's in it for men? Like, yeah, we'll come back. Like, give us something to come back for. And all the panelists like, well, real men wouldn't need a reason to come back. And me, along with this Andrew guy, we need to get his last name because he's really cool. Um, we're of the opinion, well, that's not a reason to come back. Like, you can't shame us into coming back. But you don't determine what a real man is by shaming us into. And I've also noticed that when people talk about what a real man is, it's usually characteristics that tend to benefit them, not characteristics that tend to benefit men. And so in every side of politics, left and right, and every level of education to career, we have essentially disconnected from men, and yet we expect men to stay connected. It's unrealistic.
Yeah. And to go back to our fitness example, we wouldn't say, would not be okay to say to somebody who's overweight, well, somebody who really wanted to lose weight would go to the gym and eat less and eat less.
Mhm.
As if, there's no other reason why you can be overweight, right?
Yeah,
Or, have diabetes. It's like, well, you just lose weight. That's going to fix you. It's like, well, somebody who really cared about themselves would lose weight and would
yeah,
never eat
yeah,
pizza again or whatever. It's like, that's so easy to say.
mhm,
And then, just sort of flippantly
yeah,
say, and then why would someone want to come to your house for dinner? Why would someone want to come with you to the gym if you just, you know, if you behaved that way?
yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, why would a man want to approach a woman? And I'm presuming that most men who are hanging out in the gym would want to meet someone who
Yeah.
worked out and everything, but they're not talking to them because they don't dare.
Well, I advise a lot of young men who are very interested in romance, and my advice to them has always been, especially as of late, been, do not approach. Do not approach women. I had a child of a friend of mine, who asked, like, Nafisa, I want to ask this girl out to prom. I really like her. My response with his dad there, I was like, yeah, don't. Like, like, if you're good enough, she'll ask you, and if not, then she won't. Like, it's a mass.
And that's not how I grew up, of
Yeah,
course, at all. Yeah.
that's not how I grew up either. But when you beat men up this much, we're not going to keep fighting. We're not going to keep coming in just to get punched. Like, we're jokes, as you've mentioned. We're jokes in mass media. Every new movie that comes out, the male figure, the husband, the boyfriend, is usually some dumb moron who can't figure out how to tie his own shoelaces, and
Yeah.
everybody else has to help. Even the children are smarter than this person.
Yes.
What makes Give me any reason whatsoever why men should come back to the table. The left doesn't have a reason. The right doesn't have a reason either. Even the right sometimes pretends to have a reason.
Yes.
That,
And this article mentions, I've never heard of this, but make men men again
Mhm.
is some kind of campaign, kind. Now that's a right wing kind of thing, right? Make men
Yeah,
men again. It's like, what are you telling me? I'm not a man? It's like, now
yeah,
you got to make me into a man again. It's like, that's offensive,
yeah. Yeah, no one's
um,
saying make women women again. That's not,
yeah.
unless there's some
Well,
fringe in the right. But the idea around that is like, who is anyone to determine, well, if this guy plays video games all day and just eats Totinos, he's not a man. But, this other person who sacrifices in his entire life, works for 40 years, provides and protects and never asks for anything in return, that's a real man. Sounds like a slave to me.
yeah.
So So like I think we are going to reach a critical mass, and I've written about this when the title of the article is when toxic masculinity becomes necessary masculinity. When things happen, negative things happen, we're going to be looking to these men who are hyper aggressive, hyper stoic, just thought of by society as being overly aggressive and overly assertive and just like sort of awkward for society as it stands. These are the men we're going to be looking to protect us and to save us from whatever it is that might happen in the future. I worry that when that time comes, those men will not be there to look for anymore, because where are they now? They're going into video games, they're going into everything else except for helping out society and being a function to society, and for obvious reasons. Now, this is not just a men's issue either. You mentioned before we hit record, you mentioned Adolescence, the film. I'm sorry,
Hmm.
not the film, the show, Adolescence. And Adolescence isn't about men; it is about the manosphere. But it's also about how the manosphere is impacting boys. And generally, with all the news that I've seen about Adolescence, the show, it's been overwhelmingly negative, which I am not surprised by, because the manosphere is about men prioritizing themselves. Another thing, MGTOW, men going their own way, is similar to the manosphere, different in certain kinds of ways. These are men deciding this isn't worth it anymore. I'm going to do what's best for me. That's essentially the sentiment around the manosphere and MGTOW, men going their own way. However, mass media has hijacked these terms and made it into something very negative. Why is it misogynistic for men to prioritize themselves and not want to protect and provide when there's nothing in return? So, mass media has had a hand in creating an environment where men, and now boys with shows like Adolescence, saying, they're gonna hate on us anyway, so I'm just not even gonna bother. I'm gonna go to my video games. I'm just gonna go do my own thing, and I'm not gonna participate in society any more than I need to.
Yeah, I think I mean, I think it's really blown up, adolescence. And I certainly heard a lot of positive, especially in terms of parents, that parents need to be sort of watching this and stuff. And just this, I mean, sort of what you're talking about, this boy, well, a boy and a girl.
Mhm.
You don't learn much about the girl, except that she wants him to take a picture down that he took. And I don't think it was, wasn't a bad picture, but it was taken at a little event and she doesn't want him posting the picture or whatever. And she calls him, what is it, uh,
Incel?
in incel, yeah. And so I think that's then he's only like 14, 13 or
Yep.
whatever, I mean. Um, and so, and I guess there's no doubt that he kills her.
Yeah.
There's no doubt at all.
Yeah.
Um, and it's about the family and the family, and that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
um, but they're talking about it in the UK. They're talking about it on, in the government. They're talking about like showing it in schools, and um, trying to, I guess, make sure that we have a discussion about how boys maybe aren't beaten down enough yet. Like,
Well, what they're doing is that Adolescence is a great example of what is the worst possible example of the manosphere or MGTOW. And so the idea and the sentiment behind it is that Dutch schools are showing it in their schools, right? Or looking to add that to their curriculum.
mhm.
The idea is that men have checked out so much that what if we make it such that them checking out is equivalent to murder, is equivalent to this. So this way we can force them back in even against their will. This
Yeah,
is not
if you don't come back to society, you might become so it's also like you might become a killer, you might become a wife beater, you might become, a rapist or whatever, if you don't assimilate back,
this is as much of a bad faith approach to getting men back to society as I think I've ever seen. When a show like Adolescence is used to suggest that this is what the entirety of the manosphere is, or the entirety of MGTOW is, It's not even a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the manosphere that is violent, physically and verbally and emotionally violent, spiritually violent toward women. Most, the majority of the manosphere has disconnected, not connected in a violent way, but rather disconnected. Don't even want to deal with women. Don't even want to deal with people. So one of the ways that organizations and policymakers are trying to bring men back into society and into the table is by starting with boys, having to watch this show Adolescence and say, well, if you do not protect and provide, if you are not a traditional man, even though most women today are not traditional themselves, if you yourself are not a traditional man, then you are going to turn into this, and we're going to criminalize, we're going to pathologize this manosphere MGTOW stuff. And it's really, what it tells me is that society is scared.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to hate on society. I genuinely think that everyone is wants what's best, and what's best is for men to stay involved, obviously. And this is a poor attempt at doing something that still does need to be done, which is to bring men back. And what society is trying to do is thinking that, well, if we shame young boys into coming back into the table, hopefully they will stay in society and they will just do what is asked of them, protect and provide with nothing in return, for as long as possible. It might be a temporary solution, but it is common sense to think that, well, if I don't get anything in return, I'm not going to be here. So while that 14-year-old boy that has shown Adolescence, that has shown other shows and movies like this, they might say, okay, well, I don't want to turn into that guy. I don't want to turn into that criminal. I don't want to turn into that pathology. I'm going to come back to the table. What happens when that boy is 24, 34, 44, and all he's done is give, 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 protect, provide, protect, provide, protect, and has gotten nothing in return? The manosphere is a natural evolution of what happens when men are shunned from society, when society prefers bears over men. This is what happens, and this is where we are.
Yeah, this is, it's this swing, like, because not only, like you said, the right is saying, come back to being a man, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the left is still admonishing them for being too much,
Mm-hmm.
too aggressive, too, whatever. And so, like you said, it's like you just feel squeezed. It's like, well, where the place for me is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so no wonder, you just, like, you live in your parents' basement and you just play video games, because that's like, you just, like, this small spot, where I'm not, actually in danger of offending, someone on the left, or offending someone on the right for not offending someone on the left, you know. So yeah, it's I feel, I genuinely feel for men, and I miss men. I miss men. I really do. And to some extent, I still find, some camaraderie and stuff at the gym, but not like before,
Mm-hmm.
and not the level of comfort, as before. And I miss men in the classroom too.
Yeah.
You're in the classroom also, and uh, yeah, I miss that.
Yeah.
Their contributions. When we talk about diversity, and I'm in psychology, well, you're social work, so you have a lot more women also
Well,
than men.
I right now have 80 students, 3 of whom are men.
Yeah, yeah. And so, and that hasn't always been true, in psychology. It used to be, more dominated, as most fields were more dominated by men. And So yeah, I miss that perspective in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm teaching a class now that is also also cross listed with criminal justice. So I have more men, and it's made the class richer because we can, because they're using examples from criminal justice. They don't have to give their own personal examples, but they can give examples from criminal justice literature or criminal justice examples, because that's also what they're studying.
Yeah.
And so it's given more richness to the classroom. So yeah, I miss that, and I feel I'm very worried. I think I told you this one time in a meeting, but I was in our department meeting, and they were talking about declining enrollments. We're all talking about declining enrollments in higher ed, and the department was really relieved to learn that we're losing um, uh, white students in our department. We're not losing minority students. There was no discussion of men at all, but psychology has not had enough men, and men want to see men. So men come home
Yeah.
from battle. They want to see a man. They don't, for therapy, they don't want a female therapist. But we don't have enough men in psychology in general. Not even just clinical psychology, but um, so I pointed out, I said, well, it is, I mean, society, not forever, but, society is still majority white. And certainly where I'm at a commuter campus, certainly the area from which we draw is majority white. I think this is something that we need to be concerned about. So there was this big sigh of relief. Oh, well, thank heavens we're not losing minority students. And right now, whites, particularly males, are not going to college. White males are not going to college. And the people who are deciding not to go to college are defining college as basically a grift.
Mhm.
And I asked you this before we started this conversation. What role are we playing then as college professors who are now focused on, colleges are focused on minority students? We can't do right now, international is a little bit iffy.
Mhm.
Students are being told maybe like defer a year if you got accepted or whatever. Maybe it's not a good time. But increasingly first generation college students, minority students, students who need uh, funding to go, need loans. And if we're participating in keeping minority students, poorer students in debt, and white men, but also just men, are saying this isn't worth it, then what are we doing? How is this social justice? Aren't we doing social justice? Aren't we not doing, I guess, or, it's a social injustice.
Yeah.
you know?
Well, I mean, if we're going to call ourselves inclusive, and the very next sentence talk about how this group is excluded, hooray! It's not an inclusive environment. It's a huge blind spot that we seem to have that is right in the mirror. The blind spot is in the mirror. It's on us. With the changing, ideas of what inclusion is, if inclusion is defined as exclusion of some, then yeah, it's a grift. I mean,
Mhm.
if you were to, call something a piece of paper and it's actually a rock, like it's not a piece of paper. Like it's very obvious. So I could see where some people might consider some areas of a college education to be a grift, because how can you claim to be inclusive and in the very next sentence celebrate the exclusion of an entire group? So I also think that this is kind of a precursor of like what happens next. I think it won't be long before white people, and men in particular, so men and white people, white men, will be considered the party of who are oppressed, who now we
Mhm.
work to elevate their status in society because society has beaten them down so much. There's nothing worse to be right now in American society than to be a cis white male,
Mhm.
and it's open season against cis white males. what does that mean 10, 15, 20 years from now? That they are going to be the group that we most prioritize to address and bring them back up. So it's just history continuing to repeat itself. I just don't understand how we're not seeing it.
Yeah. And what is it, what does it mean to feel unique? And how can we sort of, feel part of society and feel unique? And do we need society to tell us that, how special we like? Do we need all these affinity groups? And do we need I mean, like you said, like you can't have a white male affinity group, and yet they seem to need one,
Yes.
you know? And so why can't, what else can we be doing for ourselves? And I mean, I think white women aren't that far behind, and I think that's one of the reasons why they joined into the DEI social justice thing, to a large extent, where we again, sort of, the differences between males and females. It's just it's a thing that women do, caring and that kind of thing. I think it was maybe more, it was just easier
Yeah.
maybe for us, but it's a way to be distinct. I mean, a white woman wrote one of the most referred to books about diversity,
Yeah.
and enjoys making white women cry. I mean, and so that's her claim to fame. That's her uniqueness, right? Is that she makes women. It was like, that's a success when I've made a white woman cry
Yeah.
in one of my trainings. um so I don't know, where can we go from here? Why do we have to wait until another cycle?
I don't know. What this tells me is that, maybe we always need an oppressed class because, whether it's white people oppressing non-white people historically, and now non-white people oppressing white people, or even some white people also oppressing themselves, it
Right.
seems like we always need someone to throw rocks at. And I wonder if that speaks more about like human biology than about
Hmm.
human sociology. Maybe, and again, don't like, I've done no research on this, but what this tells me is that we always need an antagonist in order for us to think of ourselves as the protagonist. And if all of society's problems were solved, maybe that would be the very definition of hell, of just like the worst place that you can imagine, because there's no issues to solve, no one to blame for things, and no one to attack. And right now we're attacking cis white males. In the past it was, different genders, different races, different, but it's always someone or some party that we are essentially saying that those are the bad guys and all of us are good, right? Why does there always need to be a bad guy? It's, are we over entertaining and over narrativing this dynamic?
Well, I do think there's something to that, in that, um, we don't evolve quickly, right? And, historically, our world has been more dangerous. And so we are always, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, basically, from an evolutionary standpoint. And so our wiring, if you will, is to look for danger.
Mm.
Um, and we have never lived in a safer world.
Yeah.
It doesn't always feel that way. And, but we are looking for, we're looking for danger. And I think you're right. And we're also looking for power
Mm.
and control. And so when someone defines a way to get power and control, one way is to, there for a while, it was to be a victim, right? To define yourself as a victim. Heroes were in for a while, but now heroes are out, victims are in. And so, I guess we do cycle through, certain kinds of things in order to feel in control. So our real goal, sort of from a psychological perspective, is to predict the world, but ultimately to control it.
Mm.
Because if we control our environment, we're safer. And so, yeah, I think there's something to that. We're always, looking for, someone or something or a group or whatever to to ostracize, to be against us, especially now when there's not natural. The saber-toothed tiger no longer crouches in the bushes, right? And so there has to be something else, for us to focus on in order to feel as though we have some semblance of
Well,
control.
so if that's the case, then at no point will we ever come together for a common cause. We'll
Yeah,
come together for a common enemy. And so, if that's the case, then we'll either have to wait for a common enemy or identify one so we can come together there. But you're 100% right that in 2025, right now, there is much greater virtue in victimhood than in victory. And so that further alienates men too, because men are so much about like, am I winning this? Am I losing this? Like, where do I stand? Men are so much about hierarchy, right? As soon as you walk into the gym, you're asking yourself, am I the strongest guy here? If I'm not, then how far off am I? Anytime I walk into an academic classroom, which is much harder, right? Like, am I the smartest person here? Who's talking? How are they speaking? I tend to stutter a little bit. English is my fourth language. So is it a language barrier or is it an intelligence difference? So you're trying to figure that out. Every man is trying to figure out where they
yeah,
stand in that hierarchy. And so right now, if there's greater virtue in victimhood than in victory, it is essentially anti-male because men generally are not embracing of victimhood. They're looking
right.
to be victorious. Maybe they start off as victims, but they want to be victorious someday. But once they achieve that, once they become an Elon Musk, once they become a Jeff Bezos, they're then vilified. So, again, I ask this: what is there in society today for men? It's essentially as anti-man as you can possibly get. You have to protect, you have to provide, you have to do everything and not getting anything in return. And even if you are successful as a protector and a provider, don't you dare celebrate that because that's victory and we do not celebrate victory. We celebrate victimhood. There's nothing for men here. And that's just the left side. The right side too, where it's like, oh, you need to get married, you need to provide. If there's a divorce, you need to pay half alimony, pay your child support, even if you're not allowed to see your kids. Like, what is there for men? Like, there is no incentive here for us to stick around. Even me talking, I'm like, I feel like me talking, I'm convincing myself to leave society too. Like, give me something. And you know what?
Where's a role model for men right now? Like where, I mean, I don't see a role model on the right or on the
No, I
left.
don't
I
either.
mean, I don't see, I mean, you're sort of, I mean, I don't see the
But
right.
what does a role model look like for men? Someone who protects and provides and gets nothing in return? That's not a role model. I don't want.
Well, even one who's providing, I mean, where's one that's providing and protecting and is, like you said, and is a respected, who doesn't have, like 12 kids with
Yeah.
13 women.
Does not compute, does not exist, because that's the kind of man that is not portrayed in media anymore, that is not celebrated in general anymore. And those kinds of men do exist, but you're not going to hear about them in mass media because it's like, well, why would you celebrate them? There's nothing wrong with
Mm,
them. There's no victimhood here. And in fact, in some cases, that's considered to be toxic. What do you mean you're the leader in your household? What do you mean your wife doesn't have to work? Are you forcing her not to work? That's
right.
domestic violence. Well, okay. So we've gone from being the role model man to being someone who's accused of some certain things.
Well, and it's very, let me just say too, like women cannot say that they would like to stay home with their
Yeah.
kids. That is also not appropriate.
Hmm.
That's, you're being a trad wife,
Yeah.
right? And that's not, it's like, no, don't try to emulate that. That's, don't be, no, no.
It's a,
Um,
it's a society.
what?
It's a societal attack on all things traditional. And so I
Hmm.
think the way that this ends is that uh, the left and the right and society in general continues to alienate men, to then alienating white men, to then alienating white people, men and women, to then alienating anyone who's, of a particular category. Once the alienated group substrata becomes larger than the group alienating, that's when the power shifts. But then, Elizabeth, it just happens all over again.
Hmm.
Now that group is going to alienate the group that had alienated them. And it's just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
It feels, it feels a little spiteful
Oh yeah.
right now. And maybe that's, maybe that's been around, a while. But I was looking at when I was talking to James LaRue about book challenges, and he had these like different um, categories, and it was like, one of them was political, right? There was sort of a political thing. One of them, well, really two of them were sort of like about power, and one was about like sort of losing power of your over your kids. Like at certain, he could see it at certain points where kids, get a little bit old, go off to school and start to make their own friends and stuff. And then another time when they don't want to hang out with the parents at all anymore. They want, they want to be away from the parents, and that the parents, sort of like, would try to censor books and stuff that had to do with certain. It's like, oh, my kid's growing up too fast or whatever. And then there was, power, and then there was politics. And I asked him, I said, well, is there another category now? And he's like, I don't know. What would you name that? And I've been thinking since then. And one thing was, sort of spite.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't even care about this book. I don't really care. I've never darkened the doorway of the public library, so since I've left school, I read on my Kindle or or read the newspaper or whatever. I don't even go to the library
Yeah.
anymore. My kids are grown, whatever. But still, for spite, I want to do this. And I do feel like there's more of that.
Yeah.
There's some, you know, just poking,
Yeah.
just
Well,
meanness,
spite is by definition in bad faith, right? And usually that bad faith comes from being spited before. And so
Hmm.
I think, this back and forth, the win comes from someone getting hit and deciding not to hit back. Because, the people that are being alienated right now, they're now incentivized to alienate the alienators
Hmm.
when they are in power. The question is, can we have the responsibility and maturity to say, okay, now that we're in power, whoever we is, we're not going to hold it against the people that have held that power
Right.
against us. And I just have not seen that happen in centuries of human history. We are
Hmm.
obsessed with hurting people that have hurt us, which is understandable and makes sense. But we're not going to win by doing that. We win by choosing not to hurt the people that have hurt us and welcoming them into our dinner tables, in our homes, in our classrooms, in our facilities, and showing them that the best way to defeat our enemies is to turn them into our friends.
You know what? I read um, a little blurb about one of the kamikaze pilots who crashed into Pearl Harbor.
Mm.
So he crashed, the plane blew up, and it did, damage a ship. But it kind of missed, it's like it hit, like into the water and kind of, and the naval, the ship's commander um, gave that kamikaze pilot
Mm.
a military burial at sea.
Mm.
He demanded that his crew give that pilot a military burial at sea. And so they had, they put his body, in a stretcher thing, and they, put it in. And it gave me chills to read, that again, this is sort of what you're talking about, right? Like this person did what they thought was right for their country, or was forced into it. I mean, I don't know that most that, but that that pilot was deserving of respect.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I mean, that blows my mind. And could I do that? I don't think so. I don't think that I could do that. And I certainly haven't demonstrated that after being canceled. I have not demonstrated that I have been super forgiving of people who've been mean to me. And so yeah, I don't know. I think, it's that it is a hard ask. And sadly, like you said, coming together for towards a common enemy. I mean, do we have to? I think you're right. Like, do we have to go to war? Do we have to have another, do we have to have more planes flying into, um, buildings in order to bring the country together? And can we?
Mm.
Have we alienated so many people, so many factions now, that we don't know how
Yeah.
to sort of come
Well, I
together?
guess we'll find out because it's been a back and forth tennis match for centuries now. So
Eventually,
yeah,
we're gonna.
eventually we'll
Yeah.
find out.
Yeah. And hopefully it won't be each other. Maybe it'll be something else. Maybe it'll be global warming
That
or something
scares me
like that.
even more because if it's some sort of
That'll
alien invasion or artificial intelligence taking over, we already lost.
yeah,
At least when we fight each other, we have, closer to 50-50 odds. But if it's an alien civilization that is way more advanced than us, and that's the common enemy that brings us together, how long are we really going to be together before we're annihilated?
yeah, yeah. I just hope it's quick. Okay, so we need to end on a high note. How can we end on a high note here?
Well, I think there's some hope. The conversations that we're having about men's mental health and mental health in general, and we're acknowledging the active process of societal alienation of men, white people, and certain substrata of groups. And I think the high note here is that just talking about by virtue of this podcast and some of the other conversations we've had that are accessible for public consumption, that is a step in the right direction because you don't know what random listener or random viewer is going to watch or listen to this and say, you know what, okay, like I get it. So people understand my trials and tribulations and what I'm going through. So that might get me through another day and keep me motivated. So it's a piece by piece thing. It's very small steps in the right direction, but as long as they're, journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and I think this is another step.
Okay, we'll leave it there before we say something negative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Please consider donating to the Institute for Liberal Values, a 501c3 nonprofit organization at ilvalues.org. All donations go to support our continued programming to realize our mission to provide the skills and support required to build community where there has been division, to encourage free expression where there has been censorship, and to foster optimism where there is fear.